The wind howled through the canyon with a fury that could strip flesh from bone, and Clayton Reed knew that if he did not find shelter soon, this desolate stretch of Texas hill country would become his grave. It was December 1877, and the unexpected blizzard had turned the normally mild winter landscape into a death trap. Clayton had been riding for 3 days straight from San Antonio to Llano, carrying urgent documents for the land office, when the storm caught him unprepared in the open country between settlements. His horse, a sturdy roan mare named Sagebrush, struggled through the mounting drifts, her breath coming in white plumes that disappeared instantly into the swirling snow. Clayton pulled his coat tighter, though the threadbare fabric offered little protection against the bitter cold. He had been alone for so long that sometimes he forgot what it felt like to have someone waiting for him somewhere, someone who cared whether he made it through another day. At 28 years old, he had spent the last decade drifting from town to town, taking whatever work he could find, never staying long enough to form attachments that might hurt when it came time to move on. The loneliness had become such a familiar companion that Clayton barely noticed it anymore, like a dull ache in an old injury. He had learned to prefer solitude after losing his family to cholera when he was 18. His parents and younger sister had died within a week of each other, leaving him with nothing but painful memories and a desperate need to escape the past. So he had ridden west, always west, chasing the horizon and running from ghosts that followed him anyway. But now, in this moment, with death closing in from all sides in the form of freezing wind and blinding snow, Clayton found himself wishing he had someone to think about him, someone who would mourn if he did not make it through. The realization struck him harder than the cold, a sudden sharp awareness of how empty his life had become. Through the curtain of white, Clayton spotted something that made him pull hard on the reins. A dark shape lay half buried in the snow beside what looked like the remains of a broken-down wagon. He urged Sagebrush closer, squinting against the wind, and his heart lurched when he realized it was a person, curled into a ball, covered in a thin layer of ice and snow. Clayton dismounted immediately, his legs nearly giving out when his boots hit the ground. He stumbled through the drift and dropped to his knees beside the figure. It was a woman, he could see now, dressed in clothes far too light for this weather. Her lips were blue, her face deathly pale, and for a terrible moment he thought she was already gone. But when he pressed his fingers to her throat, he felt a faint pulse, slow and weak but still there. "Hold on," he said, though he did not know if she could hear him. "I have got you." He looked around desperately for shelter and spotted a rocky overhang about 50 yards away, barely visible through the storm. It was not much, but it would have to do. Clayton scooped the woman into his arms, alarmed by how light she felt, how cold her body was even through the layers of fabric. He grabbed Sagebrush's reins with his free hand and pushed forward through the snow, every step an exhausting battle against the wind. The overhang turned out to be the entrance to a small cave, barely tall enough to stand in but deep enough to offer protection from the worst of the storm. Clayton carried the woman inside and laid her down gently on the driest patch of ground he could find. He worked quickly, his own hands numb and clumsy, to unsaddle Sagebrush and bring his gear into the cave. The mare would have to weather the storm at the entrance, but at least she would be out of the direct wind. Clayton's fingers fumbled with his supplies, pulling out everything he had. A thin bedroll, a wool blanket that had seen better days, his spare shirt, and most importantly, the makings for a fire. He gathered what little dry wood he had carried and some debris from the back of the cave, arranging it carefully. His matches were damp, and he went through 4 before one finally caught. He nursed the tiny flame with shaking hands, feeding it carefully until a proper fire crackled to life. The woman had not moved. Clayton turned his attention to her, and what he saw made his stomach clench with worry. She was soaked through, her dark hair plastered to her head, ice crystals forming on her eyelashes. He knew that getting her out of the wet clothes was critical, but propriety warred with necessity in his mind for only a moment before survival instinct won out. "I am sorry," he said to her unconscious form, "but you will die if I do not do this." He worked as quickly and respectfully as possible, removing her wet dress and undergarments, trying not to look more than necessary, focusing only on the task at hand. He wrapped her in his spare shirt first, then his own coat, then the wool blanket, and finally pulled her close to the fire. Clayton stripped off his own wet outer layers, hanging everything near the flames to dry, and huddled in just his undershirt and pants, using his body heat to warm the woman further by pulling her against his chest. For hours, he sat like that, keeping the fire fed, rubbing circulation back into her cold limbs, talking to her even though she could not hear him. He told her about sagebrush, about the job waiting for him in Lano, about anything he could think of to fill the silence and keep himself awake. As night fell and the storm continued to rage outside, Clayton felt exhaustion pulling at him, but he fought it, afraid that if he slept, the fire would die and they would both freeze. It was sometime in the darkest part of night when the woman finally stirred. Clayton felt her muscles tense, heard a small gasp, and then she was pulling away from him, her eyes flying open in panic. "Easy," he said quickly, holding his hands up. "You are safe. I found you in the storm. You were freezing." The woman stared at him, her eyes wide and disoriented. Even in the dim firelight, Clayton could see they were a remarkable shade of green, like spring grass after rain. She looked down at herself, registered that she was wearing unfamiliar clothes, and her hand flew to her throat. "I did not," Clayton said, feeling heat rise in his face despite the cold. "I mean, I had to get you out of your wet things, but I did not look more than I needed to. You would have died. Your clothes are drying." He pointed to where her dress hung near the fire. The woman's gaze followed his gesture, then came back to his face. She studied him for a long moment, and Clayton had the uncomfortable feeling of being thoroughly assessed. Finally, she spoke, her voice rough and barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" Clayton Reed. "I was riding to Lano when the storm hit. I found you by that broken wagon. What happened?" The woman closed her eyes and pain flickered across her features. "The wheel broke. My father went for help. He told me to wait with the wagon, said he would be back within a few hours. But the storm came so fast and it got so cold. I tried to stay awake, but I could not." Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "How long was I out there?" "I do not know," Clayton said gently. "I found you maybe 6 hours ago. You were barely alive." She drew in a shaky breath. "My father. He might be out there still, looking for me." Clayton wanted to tell her that anyone caught in this storm would not have survived, but he could not bring himself to take that hope away from her, not yet. "When the storm breaks, we will look for him. But right now, we need to focus on keeping you alive. What is your name?" "Wilhelmina Turner. Everyone calls me Willa." She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. "We were traveling from Fredericksburg to Lano. My father had business there. He is a merchant." "What kind of business?" "Fabric and notions mostly. He supplies the general stores in the smaller towns." Willa's voice grew stronger as she spoke, though she still shivered. "We have made this trip a dozen times, but never in winter. The weather turned so suddenly." Clayton nodded, feeding another piece of wood to the fire. December weather in the hill country was usually mild, but every few years a northern storm would sweep down unexpectedly, catching people unprepared. This was one of the worst he had seen. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Can you move your fingers and toes? Willa wiggled her fingers experimentally, then winced. They hurt. Burns almost. That is good. Means the circulation is coming back. It will hurt worse before it gets better, but it means you will keep them. Clayton had seen frostbite before, knew how easily a person could lose digits or whole limbs to the cold. Keep moving them. I know it hurts, but you have to. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. Clayton found himself stealing glances at Willa, taking in details he had not noticed in his initial panic to save her life. She looked to be in her early 20s, with delicate features and dark hair that fell past her shoulders in damp waves. Even pale and exhausted, there was a strength in her face, a determination in the set of her jaw. "Why were you traveling alone?" Willa asked suddenly. "No horse and wagon, no companions. I travel light and alone, always have." Clayton poked at the fire, avoiding her gaze. "I had some papers to deliver to the land office in Leno. Figured I could make the trip in 3 days if the weather held. Obviously, I figured wrong. Do you do that often? Travel alone? It is all I do. I take jobs here and there, courier work mostly, some ranch hand labor when I need the money. Move from place to place. That sounds lonely." The observation, stated so simply and without judgment, hit Clayton harder than he expected. He had spent years telling himself that solitude was a choice, that he preferred it that way, but hearing someone else name it made the lie harder to maintain. "I suppose it is," he admitted quietly. "But it is easier than the alternative." "What alternative?" "Staying, putting down roots. Caring about people who might leave." Clayton met her eyes. "Losing people hurts. Not having anyone to lose hurts less." Willa was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft. "Does it, though, hurt less?" Before Clayton could answer, a particularly fierce gust of wind sent snow swirling into the cave entrance, and sagebrush whinnied nervously. Clayton went to check on the mare, making sure she was as sheltered as possible, and when he returned, he found Willa had moved closer to the fire, still wrapped in the blanket but sitting up straighter. "You saved my life," she said as he settled back down. "I would be dead if you had not found me." Clayton shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. But anyone did not. You did. Willa's green eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "What do you want?" "What? As a reward. For saving my life, what do you want? Money." "We do not have much, but my father would give you something. A job, perhaps, or goods from his store, name it." Clayton stared at her, caught off guard by the question. What did he want? The honest answer was that he had not thought about what he wanted in so long that he barely knew anymore. He had spent a decade focused on survival, on keeping moving, on not feeling too much. But looking at Willa now, at this woman he had pulled from the edge of death, seeing the way the firelight caught in her damp hair and made her eyes shine, he found himself saying the truest thing he had said in years. "Just your smile." Willa blinked, clearly surprised. "What?" "You asked what I want. I want to see you smile. To know that you are all right, that you survived this. That is enough." For a long moment, Willa just looked at him, and Clayton wondered if he had said something foolish, revealed too much of the loneliness that lived inside him like a hollow ache. But then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, tentative at first, then growing warmer, reaching her eyes and transforming her features from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "Like this?" she asked. Clayton felt something shift in his chest, like a door he had locked years ago suddenly swinging open. Yes, exactly like that. The storm raged on through the night, but inside the small cave, something fragile and new began to grow. They talked, at first in fits and starts, then more freely as exhaustion and circumstance, broke down the usual barriers between strangers. Willa told him about growing up in Fredericksburg, about her mother who had died when she was young, about helping her father with his business and dreaming of maybe one day opening a dress shop of her own. "I am good with a needle," she said, a note of pride in her voice. "People say I have an eye for design, but father needs me in the business, and honestly, we do not have the capital for me to start something on my own. Maybe someday." Clayton told her about his childhood on a small farm in East Texas, about how he had wanted to be a teacher before sickness took his family and changed everything. He surprised himself by talking about his sister, Caroline, who had been only 15 when she died, full of life and laughter right up until the end. "She used to say that life was too short to waste on being sad," Clayton said, staring into the fire. "I think about that a lot. Wonder what she would think of how I turned out, always moving, never settling. She would probably tell me I was being foolish." "Maybe you are," Willa said gently. "But maybe you just have not found a reason to stop yet." As dawn broke, the storm finally began to ease. The wind died down to occasional gusts, and the snow stopped falling. Clayton ventured out of the cave to assess the situation and returned with grim news. The snow was deep, nearly 3 feet in places, and the landscape was unrecognizable, buried under a white blanket that hid familiar landmarks. "We should stay put for today," he said. "Let things melt a bit and give the cold a chance to break before we try to travel. We have enough wood for another day, and I have some jerky and hardtack we can share." Willa nodded, though worry clouded her features. "My father." "I know," Clayton said. "I will look around the area once the sun is higher, see if I can spot any sign of him or anyone else. But Willa, you need to prepare yourself. This storm was bad. Anyone caught out in it without shelter would not have made it." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, lifting her chin. "He is strong, stubborn too. If anyone could survive, it would be him." Clayton wanted to believe that for her sake, but he had seen too much of the world's cruelty to have much faith in miracles. Still, he kept that thought to himself and spent the morning making the cave as comfortable as possible while Willa's clothes finished drying. When she was finally able to dress in her own things again, she insisted on accompanying him to search the immediate area. They found the broken wagon easily, now just a dark shape in the snow. Clayton examined it carefully, looking for any clues about which direction Willa's father might have gone. He found tracks, barely visible under the fresh snow, leading north toward where Leno should be. "That is the way we were headed," Willa said, pointing. "He must have gone to find help." "It is at least 20 miles to Leno from here," Clayton said. "In good weather, on a good road, that is a day's walk. In this storm, with snow this deep." He did not finish the sentence, but he did not need to. They both knew the odds. They searched as far as they dared, calling out until their voices grew hoarse, but found no sign of Willa's father or anyone else. By afternoon, the cold was becoming dangerous again despite the break in the storm, and Clayton insisted they return to the cave. Willa cried that night, quiet tears that she tried to hide, turning her face away from the firelight. Clayton sat beside her, unsure what to do or say, eventually settling for just being present, a solid warmth in the darkness. After a while, she leaned against his shoulder and he put his arm around her, letting her grieve. "Tell me something," she said after a long time, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Tell me something good, something hopeful." Clayton thought for a moment, reaching back through years of cynicism and solitude to find something that might offer comfort. "When I was a boy," he began, "my mother used to say that every ending was just a new beginning in disguise. I did not believe her after she died, thought it was just something people said to make themselves feel better about loss. But lately, I have been thinking maybe she was right. Maybe the things we lose make room for new things to come into our lives. Do you really believe that? I am starting to, Clayton said, surprising himself with the honesty of it. I mean, if that storm had not hit, I would not have found you. You would have died out there. But because I did find you, because we ended up here together, maybe both our stories get to continue in a way they would not have otherwise. Willa lifted her head to look at him. You really think that? That some good can come from all this? Clayton looked down at her, at this brave woman who had lost everything in a single day, but was still fighting to find hope, and he felt something he had not felt in 10 years. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was not as alone as he had convinced himself he wanted to be. I think, he said carefully, that meeting you might be the best thing that has happened to me in a very long time. Color rose in Willa's cheeks, visible even in the flickering firelight. We have known each other less than a day. I know, but sometimes I think a day can change everything. They stayed in the cave for 3 days total, waiting for the snow to melt enough to make travel possible, and for Clayton to be confident that Willa was strong enough to ride. During that time, they talked about everything and nothing, sharing the kind of deep conversations that usually take weeks or months to build to. Isolation and circumstance stripped away pretense, leaving only honesty. Clayton learned that Willa loved to read but rarely had access to books, that she secretly wrote poetry in a journal she carried everywhere, that she had a terrible fear of spiders but had once trapped a scorpion with her bare hands to save a neighbor child. Willa learned that Clayton had a gift for carving wood and used to make toys for his sister, that he could quote Shakespeare from memory because his mother had been educated and taught him, that he played the harmonica but had lost his somewhere between San Antonio and here. On the morning of the 4th day, they set out for Llano. Willa rode behind Clayton on sagebrush, her arms wrapped around his waist, the closeness feeling both natural and electric. The journey took most of the day, the landscape made treacherous by melting snow and hidden ice. They passed other evidence of the storm's devastation along the way: a frozen cow, a collapsed shed, trees stripped of branches by the wind. As they crested a hill overlooking the town, Willa tensed behind him. "What do I do now?" she asked quietly. "If my father did not make it, I have no family, no money, nowhere to go." "You will figure it out," Clayton said, though his heart clenched at the thought of leaving her. "You are strong. You survived that storm. You can survive this too." But even as he said it, he knew he did not want to say goodbye. The thought of riding away from Willa, of going back to his solitary existence, felt suddenly unbearable. In just 3 days, she had somehow become important to him in a way he could not fully explain, had reminded him what it felt like to care about another person, to want to protect and cherish someone. They rode into Llano as the sun was setting, golden light painting the modest buildings in warm tones. The town was bustling with activity despite the storm's aftermath, people clearing snow and repairing damage. Clayton guided Sagebrush to the sheriff's office, figuring that would be the best place to start asking about Willa's father and getting her help. The sheriff, a weathered man in his 50s named Thomas Grayson, listened to their story with a grave expression. When they finished, he shook his head slowly. "I am sorry, miss," he said to Willa. "We found a man matching your description 2 days ago about 5 miles north of here. He had made it a good distance, but the cold got him in the end. He was carrying papers with the name James Turner on them." Willa swayed and Clayton caught her elbow, steadying her. "Are you certain?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, miss. I am truly sorry for your loss. He is at the undertaker's if you want to see him, make arrangements." The next hours passed in a blur. Clayton stayed by Willa's side as she identified her father's body. as she made arrangements for burial that she could not afford, as the reality of her situation sank in. She held herself together with remarkable composure, only breaking down once they were alone in a room at the town's boarding house that Clayton paid for. "I have nothing," she said, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed. "Father's wagon is destroyed. His merchandise was mostly in it and is surely ruined by the snow, and whatever money he had on him is gone. I have the clothes on my back and a few personal items that were in my bag. That is it. I am alone in the world." Clayton knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in his. "You are not alone. I am here." "But for how long?" Willa looked at him with eyes full of pain. "You said yourself you never stay. You are probably eager to deliver your papers and move on to the next job, the next town. I cannot ask you to change your entire life for someone you just met. You did not ask. I am offering." Clayton squeezed her hands gently. "Willa, these past few days with you have been the first time in 10 years that I have not felt like a ghost, just passing through life without really living it. You make me want to stay. You make me want to try." "Try what?" "Everything. Building a life. Having a home. Being someone who matters to another person." He reached up to cup her face, wiping away a tear with his thumb. "Let me help you. Let me stay." "Why?" Willa searched his eyes. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because when you asked me what I wanted, I told you the truth. Your smile, your happiness. That is what I want." Clayton felt his own eyes sting with emotion he had suppressed for too long, and maybe a chance to see if this feeling between us could become something real. "What feeling?" "The one that makes my heart race every time you look at me. The one that makes me want to wake up tomorrow and the day after that and all the days after, just so I can spend them with you." Clayton took a shaky breath. "I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other. But Willa, I have spent 10 years alone, and I know what alone feels like." "This does not feel like alone. This feels like coming home." Fresh tears spilled down Willa's cheeks, but she was smiling through them, that same beautiful smile that had stopped his heart in the cave. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I thought I was crazy, feeling so much so fast, but I cannot help it. When I think about you leaving, it hurts. When I think about you staying, it feels like maybe everything will be all right." Clayton pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, burying her face in his shoulder. They held each other as the last light faded from the sky, two lonely souls who had found each other in the worst circumstances, and somehow made something beautiful out of survival. Over the following days, Clayton and Willa began to build a life together in Lano. Clayton delivered his papers to the land office and collected his payment, but instead of looking for the next job out of town, he started asking about work in Lano itself. The livery stable needed someone to help with the horses, and the general store owner, a jovial man named Peter McKinney, mentioned he could use an extra hand for heavy work and deliveries. Willa, meanwhile, started taking in sewing work. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Martha Patterson, a kind widow in her 60s, spread the word that Willa had skill with a needle, and soon she had more work than she could handle, mending clothes, taking in hems, and even making a few new dresses for ladies in town. They saw each other every day, Clayton stopping by the boarding house after work, sometimes bringing small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a sweet from the general store, a piece of wood he had carved into the shape of a bird. Willa would show him her latest project, read him poems from her journal, make him laugh with stories about the eccentric customers she dealt with. The town watched their courtship with interest and approval. In a place where life was hard and opportunities for joy were precious, people liked a good love story, especially one born from such dramatic circumstances. The tale of how Clayton had saved Willa from freezing spread through Lano, growing slightly more embellished with each telling, until it became local legend. "I heard he carried you 15 miles through the storm, Mrs. Patterson said one afternoon while Willa was sewing in the boarding house parlor. Willa smiled, not bothering to correct the exaggeration. "He saved my life. That is the important part. And now he is courting you proper. It is romantic, dear, like something from one of those novels ladies read." Mrs. Patterson settled into her chair with her knitting. "Are you going to marry him?" The question caught Willa off guard. She and Clayton had not discussed marriage explicitly, though the unspoken understanding that they were building toward a future together hung in the air whenever they were alone. "I do not know," she said honestly. "It has only been a few weeks. Time does not mean much when you know, Mrs. Patterson said sagely. "I knew I would marry my Herbert after 2 days. We had 43 years together before the good Lord took him. Best 43 years of my life." She looked at Willa over her spectacles. "That young man looks at you like you hung the moon, dear. And you light up like a candle when he walks in the room. Do not let fear or propriety make you wait too long for happiness." That evening, when Clayton came by after finishing work at the livery, Willa suggested they take a walk despite the chill in the air. They strolled through the quiet streets of Lanneau, their breath making white clouds in the winter air, and ended up at the edge of town where they could see the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "What are you thinking about?" Clayton asked, noticing her unusual quietness. "The future," Willa said. "What it might look like, where we are heading." Clayton was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have been thinking about that too, about what I want my life to look like now that I am not running anymore." "And what do you want, honestly?" "I want a piece of land, not much, just enough for a house and maybe a few animals. I want to wake up in the morning with a reason to be glad for another day. I want someone to share meals with, to talk to about nothing and everything, to grow old beside." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I want all of that with you, Willa, if you will have me." Willa's heart pounded so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Not yet," Clayton said, and she felt a stab of disappointment before he continued. "I want to do it right. I want to have something to offer you first, more than just words and hopes. I have been saving my wages, and I have been talking to a man who has land for sale south of here. 40 acres with a creek running through it. I almost have enough for the down payment. Give me another month or two and I will have a place to bring you home to. Then I will ask you properly." "Clayton Reed," Willa said, touching his face gently. "I do not need a house to say yes. I lived through freezing to death because you found me when you did not have to stop. You could have ridden past, could have left me there and saved yourself the trouble. But you did not. You stopped. You stayed. You cared when you had no reason to except that it was the right thing to do." She blinked back tears. "That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of man you are, the kind of man I want to spend my life with. But I want to give you security, a real home." "You already have," Willa said. "Home is not a place, Clayton, it is a person. You are my home now." Clayton pulled her close and kissed her, a sweet, gentle kiss that promised everything words could not quite capture. When they broke apart, both were smiling, and Willa thought about how strange it was that the worst day of her life had led to the best thing that ever happened to her. "So when I do ask in a month or two, the answer will be yes?" Clayton asked, a teasing note in his voice. "The answer is already yes," Willa said, "but I will wait for you to ask properly if that is important to you." They married in March of 1878, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Lanneau. Willa wore a dress she made herself from fabric she purchased with her sewing money, a lovely deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Clayton wore a new suit that fit him properly for the first time in his adult life, purchased with money from the land sale. He had managed to buy the 40 acres and with help from men in town, had built a small house, just 2 rooms and a loft, but solid and weatherproof. Mrs. Patterson cried through the whole ceremony and hosted a reception at the boarding house after, where it seemed like half the town showed up to celebrate. Sheriff Grayson gave a toast, saying he had seen a lot in his years, but nothing quite as moving as 2 people finding love in the middle of tragedy. Peter McKinney from the general store gave them a set of dishes. The Reverend, a young man named Samuel Whitfield, gave them a family Bible. But the best gift came from an unexpected source. A woman Willa had made a dress for, the wife of a banker, pulled her aside during the reception and handed her an envelope. "What is this?" Willa asked. "A loan," the woman said. "Interest-free, payable whenever you can manage it. My husband and I talked, and we think you should open that dress shop you have been dreaming about. There is a space available next to the general store. It is small, but it would be perfect for you. The ladies in this town need someone with your skills, and frankly, dear, you are too talented to spend your whole life doing mending. Build something of your own." Willa was speechless, overcome by the unexpected kindness. She looked across the room at Clayton, who was talking with some of the men from the livery, and caught his eye. He smiled at her, that warm, genuine smile she had come to love, and raised his glass in a small, private toast just for her. They moved into their new house a week after the wedding, carrying the few possessions they had accumulated between them. That first night, sitting on the porch they had built together, watching the sun set over land that was theirs, Clayton pulled Willa close and said, "Are you happy?" "More than I ever thought possible," Willa said honestly. "Are you?" "I did not know I could feel like this," Clayton admitted. "For 10 years I just existed. I did not live, not really. But now with you, every day feels full of purpose and meaning and joy." "You saved me, Willa, just as much as I saved you that day in the storm." "We saved each other," Willa corrected. "And we will keep saving each other every day in all the small ways that matter." The first year of their marriage was hard work but filled with happiness. Clayton worked at the livery and on their land, slowly building up a small herd of cattle and planting crops. Willa opened her dress shop in May, and it quickly became popular, not just for her skill with a needle but because she had an eye for what would flatter each woman who came in, regardless of age or size or budget. They made friends in town, became part of the community in a way neither of them had experienced before. For Clayton, who had spent a decade drifting, never forming attachments, it was a revelation to have people who knew his name, who cared how his day went, who invited him and Willa over for dinners and dances and church socials. For Willa, who had lost her only family, the community became a new family, people who supported her business and celebrated her successes. But the greatest joy came in January of 1879, when Willa realized she was pregnant. She told Clayton on a cold evening much like the one when they had first met, exactly 1 year ago. He had come in from working in the barn, stamping snow off his boots, and found her sitting in the rocking chair he had made for her, crying softly. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately, crossing to her in 3 long strides. "Are you hurt? Did something happen?" "Nothing is wrong," Willa said through her tears. "Everything is right. Clayton, we are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, the words not quite registering. Then understanding dawned and his face transformed, going from concern to wonder to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby? You are certain?" "I am certain. I saw the doctor today. He says the baby will come in late summer, probably August." Clayton dropped to his knees in front of her chair, taking her hands in his trembling ones. "We are going to be parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Willa, we are going to have a child." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly worried. I know we have not talked much about children, and money is still tight with the shop just getting started." "Happy," Clayton let out a laugh that was half sob. "Willa, I never thought I would have this. A wife, a home, a family. After I lost Caroline and my parents, I told myself I would never have those things again, that wanting them would only lead to pain. But you showed me that love is worth the risk. And now we get to bring new life into the world, a piece of both of us. Yes, I am happy. I am terrified, but I am happy." They held each other, laughing and crying at the same time, and talked late into the night about names and possibilities and dreams for this child, who would be born from the love they had found in the most unlikely circumstances. Willa's pregnancy was not easy. She was sick often in the early months, and as summer came on, the heat made her miserable. She had to close the shop for a while, unable to spend long hours at her sewing machine, and though they had savings, money became tight. Clayton took on extra work, anything he could find, determined to make sure they had enough for the baby and for any complications that might arise. But through it all, they had each other. On the hard days, when Willa was too exhausted to move or when Clayton was worried sick about money, they remembered what they had survived together, how they had met with death literally at the door and chose to live anyway. A difficult pregnancy and tight finances seemed manageable compared to that. Their son was born on August 15th, 1879, after a labor that lasted 20 hours and left both parents utterly exhausted. But when the midwife, a no-nonsense woman named Cordelia Harris, placed the squalling infant in Willa's arms, every moment of pain and fear evaporated. "He is perfect," Willa whispered, staring down at the tiny red face. "Clayton, look at him. He is perfect." Clayton, who had been allowed into the room after the birth, sank onto the bed beside his wife and new son, his hand shaking as he touched the baby's impossibly small fingers. What should we name him? They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on anything. Now, looking at their son, Willa knew exactly what felt right. "Charles," she said. "Charles Reed after your father, so that good man's name lives on." Clayton's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that. Your family deserves to be remembered," Willa said gently. "This baby is a new beginning, but new beginnings can honor the past too. Charles James Reed with James for my father. What do you think?" "I think it is perfect," Clayton said, his voice breaking. He leaned over to kiss Willa's forehead, then his son's. "Welcome to the world, Charles. We promise to do right by you." The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the ordinary struggles and joys of building a life. Their small ranch grew slowly but steadily, Clayton developing a reputation as a fair dealer and skilled horseman. Willa reopened her dress shop when Charles was 6 months old, bringing him with her and setting up a cradle in the back room where he would sleep while she worked. The town of Llano continued to grow, and they grew with it. Clayton became friends with Sheriff Grayson, sometimes helping out when an extra hand was needed. Willa joined the church ladies' auxiliary and helped organize socials and fundraisers. They were no longer the tragic couple who had found each other in a storm, but simply Clayton and Willa Reed, well-respected members of the community. Charles grew into a bright, curious child with his mother's green eyes and his father's serious demeanor. When he was 3, Willa became pregnant again, and their daughter Sarah was born in the spring of 1883. 2 years after that came another son, Daniel, and finally, when Willa was 32 and Clayton was 38, their youngest child, a daughter they named Caroline after Clayton's lost sister. Raising 4 children on a modest ranch and dress shop income was challenging, but Clayton and Willa faced it together, the partnership they had forged in that cave years ago only growing stronger with time and trial. They taught their children the value of hard work, kindness, and perseverance. They told them the story of how their parents met, how love could bloom even in the coldest circumstances if people were brave enough to reach for it. As the children grew, so did the ranch and the business. By the early 1890s, they had one of the larger herds in the area, and Willa's dress shop had expanded to include 2 employees and a small selection of ready-made clothing in addition to custom work. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, secure in a way that seemed miraculous to 2 people who had each, at different times, thought they would die alone. On a cold December evening in 1897, exactly 20 years after the day Clayton had found Willa in the snow, they sat together on their porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun set. Their children were grown now, Charles helping run the ranch at 18, Sarah at 14 already showing her mother's gift for sewing, Daniel at 12 dreaming of becoming a lawman like Sheriff Grayson, and little Caroline at 8 still young enough to believe in fairy tales. "Do you ever think about that day?" Willa asked, her head resting on Clayton's shoulder. "The storm." "Every year when winter comes," Clayton admitted. "How close we both came to never having any of this. It feels like a lifetime ago and like yesterday all at once." "I still remember the moment I woke up in that cave and saw you," Willa said. "I was so confused and scared, but there was something about your face, the way you looked at me, that made me feel safe. Like maybe everything would be all right. I remember thinking you had the most beautiful eyes I had ever seen," Clayton said with a soft laugh. "Even half frozen and terrified, you were the most beautiful thing in the world to me. And when I asked what you wanted, and you said just my smile." Willa smiled now, that same smile that had captured Clayton's heart 2 decades ago. "That was the moment I started falling in love with you, I think. Most men would have asked for money or repayment, but you just wanted to know I was happy, that I was all right." "It was the truth," Clayton said. "It is still the truth. Your happiness, your smile, that is all I have ever wanted. Everything else, the ranch, the house, the family, those are all just bonuses. You are the reason I stopped running. You are the reason I learned to live again." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sounds of their children, Sarah helping Caroline with her lessons, Charles and Daniel arguing good-naturedly about something. Normal sounds, everyday sounds, the sounds of a life fully lived. "I am glad you saved me," Willa said quietly. "I am glad you let me," Clayton replied. As winter settled over Llano and another year drew to a close, Clayton and Willa Reed sat together on their porch, 2 people who had found each other in the darkest moment and built a lifetime of light. They had faced hardship and loss, celebrated triumphs and weathered disappointments, raised children and built a home, all because 20 years ago, a lonely cowboy had chosen to stop when he saw someone in need, and a frightened woman had chosen to trust a stranger. The years continued to pass, as years do, bringing with them the expected joys and sorrows of life. Charles married a sweet girl named Emma Harrison in 1902 and brought her to live on the ranch, where he took over more and more of the daily operations as Clayton's body began to show the wear of decades of hard physical labor. Sarah fell in love with a teacher named Robert Mitchell, who came to Llano in 1904. And though it broke Willa's heart a little to see her daughter move to Austin where Robert had accepted a position at a school, she was happy Sarah had found a good man. Daniel surprised everyone by not becoming a lawman, but instead discovering a talent for working with horses, eventually opening his own stable and training business just outside of town. And Caroline, their youngest, had inherited her mother's gift for design and her father's head for business. and by the time she was 20, she had expanded the dress shop into a full clothing store that served customers from 3 counties. Clayton and Willa became grandparents, first when Charles and Emma had twins in 1903, then again when Sarah gave them a grandson in 1906. They spoiled the grandchildren shamelessly, telling them stories and teaching them skills, and giving them the kind of unconditional love that only grandparents can provide. As Clayton entered his 60s, his hair gone completely gray and his once strong body beginning to fail, Willa remained his constant companion and greatest love. They still took walks together when his joints allowed it, still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands like young sweethearts. The passion of youth had mellowed into something deeper and more precious, a love built on decades of partnership and unwavering commitment. In the spring of 1912, Clayton fell ill with pneumonia. For a week, he fought the infection while Willa sat by his bedside, reading to him, telling him stories, holding his hand. The doctor was not optimistic, but Willa refused to give up hope. She had survived freezing to death because Clayton would not let her go, and she would not let him go now. Against all odds, Clayton recovered, though it left him permanently weakened. He could no longer do heavy work, could barely make it from the bedroom to the porch most days, but he was alive, and that was enough. They hired a young man to help Charles with the ranch work, and Willa scaled back her hours at the store to spend more time at home. "I am sorry," Clayton said one afternoon, frustration clear in his voice. "You should not have to take care of me like this. You should be enjoying your later years, not nursing an invalid." "Clayton Reed," Willa said firmly, setting down the book she had been reading to him. "Do you remember what you said to me the night you asked me to marry you? You said home is not a place, it is a person. You are my home. Taking care of you is not a burden, it is a privilege. How many people get to spend 35 years with the love of their life? How many people get the kind of happiness we have had?" "Not nearly enough," Clayton admitted. "Exactly. So stop apologizing for needing help and just let me love you the way you have loved me all these years." They had 14 more years together. Years that were quieter and slower, but no less precious. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a whole family tree that had grown from a chance meeting in a blizzard half a century before. Clayton passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold December night in 1926, just a few days before what would have been the 49th anniversary of the day he found Willa in the snow. He was 77 years old and had lived a full, rich life, but Willa felt his loss like a physical blow. For the first time in nearly 50 years, she was alone. The family worried about her, especially in those first dark months after Clayton's death. But Willa, who had survived freezing to death and losing her father and building a life from nothing, was stronger than they gave her credit for. She grieved deeply and honestly, but she also remembered what Clayton had taught her about living, about finding joy even in darkness, about the importance of choosing hope over despair. She continued working at the store a few days a week, took meals with various children and grandchildren, helped care for the youngest great-grandchildren. She wrote in her journal every night, recording memories of Clayton, stories for future generations, poems about love and loss and the strange beauty of a life well lived. On December 20th, 1934, Willa woke before dawn and dressed carefully in her finest dress, the one Caroline had made for her 80th birthday. She ate a simple breakfast, then walked slowly to the small cemetery on the hill where Clayton was buried. The morning was cold, the first snow of winter beginning to fall, soft flakes that reminded her of another snowfall long ago. She stood before Clayton's grave, looking at the simple headstone that read Clayton Reed, 1849–1926, beloved husband, father, and friend. Next to it was a space reserved for her own grave, and she found comfort in knowing that eventually they would rest side by side for eternity. "Hello, my love," she said softly, her breath making white clouds in the cold air. "It has been a while since I came to visit. The cold is hard on my bones these days, but today is special. Do you remember? 57 years ago today, you found me in the snow. You saved my life and I saved yours, and together we built something beautiful." She paused, watching the snow fall, feeling it land soft and cold on her upturned face. "I wanted to thank you one more time for stopping that day, for caring when you had no reason to, for asking for nothing but my smile. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible, Clayton. You gave me love and home and family and purpose. You gave me everything." A robin landed on Clayton's headstone, bright red against the gray stone and white snow, and Willa smiled. "I will be with you soon," she promised. "And when I am, we will have forever. But until then, I will keep living. I will keep smiling. Because that is what you wanted, is it not? Just my smile." Willa Turner Reed lived to be 86 years old, passing peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1940. Surrounded by 3 generations of family who had all been touched by the love story that started with a lonely cowboy and a freezing girl, and a simple exchange about smiles. She was buried next to Clayton on a bright April morning when the wildflowers were blooming, and the Texas sky was impossibly blue. At her funeral, Caroline, now a successful businesswoman in her 50s, told the story one more time for the youngest great-grandchildren who had never heard it in full. She told them about the terrible storm, about their great-grandfather stopping when he could have ridden on, about their great-grandmother asking what he wanted in return for saving her life. "And he said he wanted just her smile," Caroline finished, her own eyes damp. That was the kind of man he was. That was the kind of love they had. He wanted her happiness more than anything, and she gave him a reason to stop running from life. Together, they built all of this. She gestured around at the assembled family. Dozens of people connected by blood and love to that single moment of compassion in a snowstorm 57 years before. "So when life is hard," Caroline said, "when you feel alone or scared or like the world is too cold and dark to bear, remember their story. Remember that sometimes all it takes is one person who cares enough to stop, one moment of kindness, one brave choice to love instead of fear. That is their legacy to us. That is what they would want us to remember." The family gathered after the service, sharing memories and stories, laughing and crying together. They talked about Clayton's quiet strength and Willa's fierce determination. They talked about the ranch and the dress shop that had grown into a clothing store that now had 3 locations. They talked about love and family, and the strange, wonderful ways that life can change in an instant. As the sun set over Llano, Texas, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the family gradually dispersed, heading back to their own homes and lives. But the story remained, passed down through generations, a reminder of what is possible when 2 people find each other at exactly the right moment and choose, against all odds, to build a life together. The small house Clayton built in 1878 still stood on the 40 acres south of town, now carefully preserved by the family as a piece of their history. The dress shop building downtown had a historical marker noting it as the original location of Turner Clothing Company, one of the most successful family businesses in Central Texas. And in the cemetery on the hill, 2 simple headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of Clayton and Willa Reed, whose love story began in a blizzard and ended only when death, that final frontier, temporarily separated them. But those who knew their story believed, in the way that people believe in things that cannot be proven but feel true anyway, that even death had not truly separated them. They believed that somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Clayton and Willa were together again, young and healthy and whole, still holding hands, still smiling at each other with the joy of two souls who had found their perfect match. And on cold December nights in Llano, when the wind howled and snow fell soft and white, older residents would sometimes tell the young ones about the lonely cowboy who saved a girl from freezing, about how she asked what he wanted in return, and how he asked for nothing but her smile. They told the story as a reminder that love can bloom even in the coldest circumstances, that kindness matters, that choosing to care when it would be easier not to can change everything. The story of Clayton and Willa Reed became more than just a tale of two people who fell in love. It became a touchstone, a reminder of what it means to truly see another person and choose to help them, to love them, to build a life with them. It became evidence that sometimes the most profound moments come from the simplest acts of human decency, and that a single decision to stop and help can ripple out through generations, creating family and love and hope where none existed before. In the end, that is what Clayton wanted when he said he wanted only Willa's smile. He wanted her happiness, her joy, her life to continue and flourish. And in return, she gave him all of that and more. She gave him a reason to stop running, a home to return to, a love that transformed his solitary existence into a life of meaning and purpose. Their story, which began with near death in a blizzard and a selfless act of rescue, became a story of life in its fullest sense, of love that endured through hardship and triumph, a family built on a foundation of mutual respect and unwavering commitment. It became exactly what both of them needed it to be, a second chance, a new beginning, a redemption of all the pain and loneliness that had come before. And decades after both of them had passed from this world, their great-great-grandchildren would still gather around and ask to hear the story of how it all began, of the lonely cowboy and the freezing girl and the smile that changed everything. And in the telling, Clayton and Willa lived again, forever young, forever in love, forever proof that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unlikely ways, and that true love, once found, never really ends at all.